All right. I think it's about time to get started. I hope everyone is here for the webinar for the Nipigon kayaking trip for this summer. We're super excited. This webinar is intended to give you all a bunch of information about whatever you need to know for the trip, and then an opportunity to ask any questions. So we're going to go through a presentation with you all, and then at the end you can ask some questions of us. All right, with that, let's start out with some introductions. Luke, would you like to go first?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Kelly. Hello, everyone. My name is Luke. I am the Wilderness Risk Director at Manitowish, and what that means is that I get to be kind of the person responsible for and overseeing both our Outpost programs as well as our Trips House programs for our summer camp trips. I get to work with Kelly as well as a variety of other fantastic staff that you get to cross paths with while you're here. I am someone who is new to Manitowish, and I've also been working in outdoor education for well over a decade at this point. Everything from leading canoeing trips and backpacking trips in northern Minnesota, as well as the Adirondacks and southern Ontario, to working on ropes courses, to front country outdoor education, another YMCA camp, and most recently I was running the outdoor education department at a college in central Minnesota for the last few years. I am really excited to be here, and I appreciate you all taking the time to join us for this webinar tonight.
Thanks, Luke. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly. I am the Outpost Director for Manitowish. I've grown up as a Manitowisher. My family does the Memorial Day work weekend every year. And once I got old enough, I went all the way through in camp. I went through Outpost. I did, at the time, the sea kayaking trip was in Georgian Bay, but I did the 14-day sea kayaking trip. And then worked for camp for several years as mostly a counselor before I kind of moved away. I moved to Oregon, and out in Oregon, I worked for a number of different wilderness tripping organizations, as well as some more nature and science-based education programs, and just learned a whole lot from a bunch of different places. And I'm so excited to bring all of that back to Manitowish this summer to set you all up for a great time on these trips. Luke and I have been knee-deep in figuring out all of your routes and how to get everywhere and what food you're going to bring. So I'm super excited to share that with you today. So with that, let's go into the part that you care about the most. Let's learn about your trip a little bit. All right, so the in-camp portion, oh, I'm so sorry. The lights go out in this room sometimes. Okay, the in-camp portion of this trip for you all is going to look a little bit like on opening day, you show up, you meet your trip leaders, you find out who else is on your trip, and you have just a time to get to grow a little bit as a community. And you also go straight into the swim challenge. If you haven't done an Outpost swim challenge, it is the exact same as the in-camp swim challenge. You are fully clothed, you swim a short lap, and then you have to tread water for about 10 minutes or stay afloat in any way. So that shouldn't be any different. But yeah, so that's your first day. You launch kind of right into it with Outpost. The next day, for half of the day, you're going to have some facilitation time with our leadership staff. And so this is meant to help you form a solid team before you're even on trail. So you'll get to know each other, you get to know how you work with each other, and start getting some tools to help build that so you can just be such a great, efficient team when you're out in the wilderness. So you're going to do some fun initiative and problem solving games with them. Then you also start your pack out process. You spend a whole day on this. It might be broken up between 2 days, depending on how your schedule works out. And it looks a little bit different from in camp because we give you more opportunities to make the trip your own. You're an Outpost now. You have, we give you a lot more freedom to make more choices. So I'm going to go into a little bit more about how that looks different in Outpost than it did in camp. So on in-camp trips, your counselor and your TC would choose what meals you made on the trip, and then the food room staff would pack them into bags for you, and you just go pick them up at the Trips House. In Outpost, their trip leaders use some fancy nutrition math that we have set up for them to figure out how many snacks, flour, sausage, and other ingredients your trips will need for 14 days. And then when you get onto the trail, you look at all that food and you decide what you can make of it every day for every meal. It's much more freedom. You all do a lot of cooking. as a group. And it's honestly a lot of fun. Outpost trips make some of the most creative and delicious trail food of any place I've been. So have a lot of fun with that. It's really fun. Food pack out on camp is also mostly done by your group. So what's going to happen is your trip leaders will have done all this math, this nutrition magic, and then give each of you a list of things. It'll be something like 2 pounds of flour, 1.5 big blocks of cheese, something like that. And then you get to weigh out and measure and weigh out all of that into bags or whatever container you're using for it to pack out yourself. So you're much more hands-on part of that process. And it does mean that you can curate it a little bit more. Like if absolutely everyone on your trip hates cream of wheat, then maybe your trip leader brings a little bit more oatmeal, a little bit less cream of wheat. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun imagining what I can make while you're packing it up. So yeah, it'll be great. Next, your gear pack out, you have a little bit more hands-on with the gear pack out as well. You get to choose gear that fits your trip best. You'll be wearing wetsuits on this trip, so you get to fit those. Pick out the kayaks you'll be bringing, as well as paddles, PFDs, deck compasses, kitchen supplies, and anything else you need. The last day, half day really, in camp will be your shakedown paddle day. So your trip leaders would take you out onto Boulder Lake in kayaks, probably the exact kayaks you're going to take on the trip. And you're going to practice some more technical paddling skills. You're going to practice T-rescues. You're going to practice wet exits, as well as other self-rescue techniques. You don't need to have knowledge in any of this before you come to camp. They'll help you gain anything you need. And if you do have knowledge, that's great. It'll just be to brush off some of those rusty skills. Let's move on to a little bit more about the trip itself. So we have 2 sessions of trips going out this summer for Nipigon, and you can see the dates for each of them on the screen right now. But both timelines have pretty much the same pacing. Participants will arrive and spend around 3 days in camp preparing with everything I just spoke about. Then they depart in a camp van on a 7-hour drive to a campsite on the north shore of Lake Superior, probably farther south of that Thunder Bay, which you can see on the map right now. And then the next morning, you drive another 2 hours to the drop-off point, which is oftentimes on the western side of Lake Nipigon, over here somewhere. And then the trip begins. You spend 14 days on an epic lake before you're picked up and driven about 5 hours to a campsite back on the north edge of Lake Superior again. Next morning, you get up and you make it all the way back to camp, where you spend the last couple days unpacking, cleaning, and sharing tales of your experience before you head back home. Yeah, so the dates are slightly different between the 2 sessions. The girls' trips will be going during session 1. The boys' trips will be going during session 2. There are 2 girls' trips and 2 boys' trips this summer. So yes. So I wanted to tell you a little bit more about Lake Nipigon itself. It's often called the Forgotten Great Lake because it's in the Great Lakes watershed, but people don't really know about it a lot. It's the largest tributary of Lake Superior. It's really remote. It's not very well recreated, so it's pretty pristine. It's a pretty pristine wilderness, and it's the only part of the Great Lakes watershed that has a completely intact ecosystem. Is known for stunning beauty and grandeur. It has incredible wildness. It's honestly a phenomenal place. I have not yet been to Lake Nipigon, but after reading about it and preparing for your trip, I really want to go. But because it is such a kind of pristine wilderness, we put a lot of emphasis on the trips that go out there onto following leave no trace principles so that we can continue to enjoy the area for years to come. And then as for what your route will be, like I said, you will probably come in on that west side of Lake Nipigon, and then your trip leaders will usually plan a route that heads a little bit to the north or a little bit to the south. It kind of depends on whatever they choose with their picking the routes. They're currently working on it right now, so we don't have any information about what those are. You'll find out when you get here. But generally speaking, you'll travel along the shoreline of Lake Nipigon with some occasional crossings across bays or to check out islands. So yeah, it's going to be a really cool experience. Let's move back to Luke to talk about daily life and some other environmental factors.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kelly. So daily life, generally what you're going to be doing out there is a fair amount of paddling. You're probably going to average, I would say, between 6 and 16 miles per day. Some days might be a little bit under that. Some days might be a little bit over that. And what impacts that distance can be anything and everything from what the weather looks like, how choppy the water is, if your leaders are running through some other activities or talking about the trip with you all, or maybe you find a really cool area that you want to stop and explore, go check out an island, anything like that. And maybe you're doing some slightly shorter mile days there. Other times you might get really flat water. Maybe you'll do a sunrise paddle, which is absolutely gorgeous, and be able to really crush out a lot of miles that day. Your leaders will tell you more about that as the trip goes along. Generally, you're going to be using single-person kayaks, plus there'll be a tandem kayak on the trip, because with more space, that's able to carry a larger amount of gear as you go along to help make that experience a little more pleasant. And then when you're not paddling, you're going to be camping. We get to do some really fantastic backcountry camping, and that can be anything from sandy beaches to being right in the forest to having an area that is a little bit more developed, as we can see in our right side picture there. Some campsites will have a privy or a pit toilet. Other campsites, you might just be finding a really flat area that looks like it works very well, and you might have to dig some cat holes as you go along. You're going to encounter a lot of different types of weather while you're up there as well. So let's talk about that a bit. Temperatures during the day, not as hot as they would be on several of our other trips. A 70s to 80s is generally the temperature range during the day, 40s to 50s at night. Similar to mileage, there is a lot of room for that to vary, and it is good to be prepared for that. Kelly's going to give us some really good information here in a few minutes around packing and preparing for the trip, but keeping in mind that generally during the day it'll be comfortable, a little bit cooler at night, but it can get higher and lower than that. The sun while you're out there, yes, you will get days where it is overcast and rainy and kind of foggy, sort of like it's been up at camp here today. But then other days you're going to get lots of sun. Your leaders will be paying a lot of attention to managing that sun exposure and helping make sure that people stay covered up, have sunscreen on, stay in the shade if it's maybe an extremely hot day and you're taking a day off of the water, what we call a duff day. But making sure that everyone stays happy and healthy throughout that. The flip side, on the days that are less sunny, you might run into some rain. You almost certainly will run into some rain while you're out there. But that can be anything from rain to thunderstorms. Usually those tend to roll in and roll out pretty quickly. It's rare, just based on the size of the lake and some of the weather patterns up there, that you'll get something long and extended. So be aware of that and know that it's unlikely that you're going to have multiple days in a row of rain, but don't quote me on that. And then finally, we are also aware that you are out in, as Kelly was saying, a remote wilderness area. So it is entirely possible that there could be some more severe weather events, which we monitor really closely here at camp. And then if there is something that we need to pass along to leaders of like, hey, we're expecting really high winds in like the next 48 hours or something like that, then that's something that we're able to communicate to them. All right, cool. I believe that we have kind of covered what our water conditions are going to look like, but we have some really fantastic pictures up here. Our upper right-hand picture has some really smooth water, which makes for really great paddling. But on the flip side, our bottom left picture with our red kayaks right on the shore, sometimes that water can get kicked up, get really choppy. You can get some whitecaps while you're out there. So we can kind of get the whole range of both of them and a lot of space in between. The shoreline while you're out there, depending on where you're camping, hiking, exploring, anywhere from a rocky pebble beach, you might get a sandy beach, or you might be able to paddle right up to the shore and walk directly into the woods. Because it is such a pristine and untouched landscape, and it's a pretty large lake, you do get, I would say, a little bit of everything, depending on where you're at around the lake. Finally, let's talk a little bit about the wildlife that you're going to see up there. So because this area is so pristine and undeveloped, there's a lot of wildlife. The flip side of that is because there are so rarely humans up there, wildlife tend to be really sensitive to the sight, sound, and smell of humans. and will generally make an effort to avoid humans because humans tend to be unfamiliar to them. So there are moose up there. There's a lot of great fishing. You'll see all sorts of birds, amphibians like some fish, some frogs as well. You'll see lots of those while you're up there if you keep an eye out for them. And then there's also some mid-sized animals. That could be otters, beavers, things like that. But I recommend being as quiet as possible to increase your chance of seeing those. If you're paddling along and everyone's singing and talking, it's much more likely that they will hear you before you ever see them, and then they will get away from you. Finally, one thing that we like to talk about for all of our trips, because we do travel in the wilderness, is bears. Bear contact is very, very rare up here, and we have really never had an issue with any of our trips having interactions with bears. That being said, it is still wilderness, and we still want everybody to hold to the protocols that we work with park rangers on to reduce the likelihood of a bear contact. What that looks like is being really careful about how and where we're doing our cooking, where we're storing our food, dealing with trash, things like that. Your leaders will tell you more about that when you get here during your trip prep, but it's something we like to preface because we get a lot of people who are asking, hey, we're going out in the middle of the woods. Are there bears there? We're not expecting anything, and we're still taking a lot of precautions to make sure that it stays that way. Finally, I do want to talk about the culture of the area. Nipigon, or Lake Nipigon, is an area that has been used for thousands and thousands of years by First Nation people, most often the Ojibwe. They are still the only ones who are allowed to do any sort of development around the lake. So as we can see in our bottom center picture there, we have a house. Those are very uncommon up there, but it is still possible that you might encounter them. So any people that you might encounter around the lake, there's a high likelihood that they are from the Ojibwe tribe. So being kind of aware of that is really helpful. It is also possible while you're out on your trip that you might find old trapping cabins like we see in our picture there, or pictographs that were left by people thousands of years ago, which really shows kind of the history of the lake and that area and that landscape around it. One thing that I do want everyone to be aware of before you get up there, we are welcome to enjoy that cultural history, but specifically for the pictographs, we do not want to take any pictures of those. That's a request that has been made by Ojibwe tribes, so we just want to preface that and for everyone to be very aware of it. All right, with that, I'm going to pass it back to Kelly.
Thanks, Luke. All right. I next want to talk about a little bit of what happens after the trip. And this isn't when you get back to camp. This is when you get home. So this trip is going to be an incredibly remote and probably fairly formative experience. Oftentimes groups on Nipigon will go 5 days without seeing another person. So it can be a little jarring coming from that solitude back into the loud busyness of modern society and everyday life. So I just want to talk to both you participants and then also to the parents and guardians that make sure you create space and time for yourself as a participant or as a parent for the participant to process the incredible trip that just happened. It can be really easy for those of us back home to not realize that the normal 2 weeks that we went through were an experience that changed a participant's perspective on themselves and what they can be capable of. So just as you're preparing for what happens after the trip, planning the rest of the summer, and then as you pick up your participant and hear all these cool stories, just be mindful that what might have been a short amount of time for us could have been life-changing for them. So just wanted to put that on your radar. Let's move on into what to bring. So you all hopefully have found the packing list that is on the website. If you haven't, it's on the website. You can just Google Manitou's packing list and you can find it that way. We will also probably send it out afterwards with a copy of this webinar. But I wanted to emphasize a couple of items on the packing list, as well as touch on some advice that previous trip leaders have given that didn't quite make it to the packing list. So the first thing I want to talk about is your passport. This trip is in Canada. You really need a passport. So please make sure you bring one. And also make sure that your passport is more than 6 months, has more than 6 months to go before it expires. Otherwise, they will not let you out of the country. And that would honestly be a horrible way to not to get to go on this trip if you just don't have the right passport. So please be very mindful and intentional about your passport. Moving on to some more gear clothing items. Your raincoat and pants should, when you're purchasing them, if you have them already, just try to make sure that they're big on you so that you can fit the other layers underneath you. You know, the weather in Nipigon can be pretty warm, but it also tends to drop pretty cold at night. And also when there's big weather. So making sure that you can fit all of your layers and your puffy underneath your rain jacket is a really solid thing to do. There's nothing worse than being warm but wet, or not wet but cold because you can't wear your layers. So yes. Another note about rain jacket and rain pants is they should ideally be made of Gore-Tex or a similar 3-layer weatherproofing material. Those just tend to be the most waterproof and durable for the trips that we run here. You also need to have one more point on waterproof clothing is camp will be supplying paddling or splash jackets to all of the participants, which is basically a fancy rain jacket that closes really tightly at the sleeves and the neck so that water doesn't get in if they're splashed by a big wave. So we supply those for you. You do not need to bring them if you do not want to. Yes. Moving on to your layering system. Your layering system is super important with how different the weather can be. So that's the base layer, the mid layer, the fleece, the puffy, just making sure that you have all of those. And especially with things like your layering system, as well as like hats and things like that, anytime that you're packing something, while you're packing it for camp, I want you to sit there and think about, am I using this during the day when I'm paddling, or am I using this at night in camp? If the answer is for both of them, maybe reassess a little bit, because you might need 2 of them. Like I would not use the same mid base layer during the day that I would while I'm in camp. You should have 2 separate ones of those. Yes. Talking about the puffy jacket for a bit, and this will also hold true with your sleeping bag, is we really highly advise that you have puffies and sleeping bags that are made of synthetic material, not down. Down is marvelous in that it's warm and it packs really small, but as soon as down gets wet, it does not keep you warm anymore. And you can fall in the lake with a synthetic puffy jacket and it will still try to keep you warm. So we really lean in to the synthetics for the sleeping bags and for the puffy jackets. Moving on to some more kayaking specific items. Neoprene booties. While you're paddling during the day, you'll be wearing neoprene booties of some sort. These are things you do have to supply, and we just ask that you look for a boot that will keep you warm, has a good tread so that you don't slip on any rocks when you're walking around, and that will be comfortable sitting in a kayak all day. This can be, I've been calling them neoprene booties. It can totally be a neoprene booty with a supportive sole, but it can also be a more tennis shoe like water shoe. It can't have a whole bunch of holes in it though. Either one is fine. I will say that the tennis shoe like water shoes tend to be a little more expensive. I would take a look at that the packing list. It has a bunch of different brands and options that we find pretty ideal. And so look at those and then see what you're thinking about and just see how it compares. Another thing is, and this one is optional, is bringing neoprene gloves, or pogies are a little unnecessary for this trip, but neoprene gloves, a lot of people do enjoy having them. Less for warmth. They can be useful to keep your hands warm while you're paddling, but more so people say it's a really good tool to prevent, if you're prone to getting sun rash, that can really help. Or if you're prone to like wind rash as well, a wind burn, sorry, not wind rash, sun rash and wind burn, neoprene gloves can be really helpful to prevent, especially because you have to keep using your hands. It can make it harder when you have those conditions while you're trying to paddle. Moving on to some sun protection. So previous leaders have emphasized that good sun protection is crucial for this trip. So make sure you bring some sort of sun hat, polarized sunglasses, SPF lip balm, your own sunscreen, just making sure that you're well protected for those really sunny days. It can also help to have a lot of people for their base layer while they're paddling during the day. It'll be a long sleeved surfer sun shirt. Your best defense against the sun is covering up. One leader told me that he wore a long sleeve surf shirt the whole time he led his trip, and he came back and he still had a tan underneath it. So just really cover up. I know I'm really prone to getting sunburned, so not everyone has different levels there, but just be really aware and intentional of your sun protection for this trip. Bug shred head net. So there are bugs on this trip. You're in the wilderness. I would say that there are not quite as crazy bugs as there are known to be on other camp trips. So if you have a bug shirt or you want to get a bug shirt because it's a really useful tool in general, I'd say go for it. But you would probably also be fine with some good bug spray and a head net. So just choose what works best for you there. Into your sleeping system, we already talked about how the sleeping bag should be synthetic. It also should be rated for about 15 to 20 degrees. We do on all of our trips suggest a sleeping bag liner as well. It adds an extra layer of warmth for like colder nights, but it also really protects your sleeping bag from, further damage, and it just keeps it cleaner, and the longevity of the bag is extended quite a bit. So we do suggest those, but that, like I said, is optional. Sleeping pads. Sleeping pads are a crucial part of your insulation system when you're sleeping that people don't think about a lot. Sleeping pads are the thing that protects your body heat from getting sucked into the ground through heat transfer. So you really need to have a good sleeping pad. We also suggest that you have a pretty sturdy one. If it is, inflatable ones are perfectly fine. Just, I would err away from the ones that are advertised as ultralight. They're really lightweight, which isn't necessary for a kayaking trip in the first point. But with that lightweight, we found comes a lot less durability, and we've had issues with them popping over the years. So I'd say err away from the ultralight sleeping pads. And then the last thing about your sleeping system is your stuff sack for your sleeping bag. I highly suggest not only a compression sack to make it sure it fits in your boat. Sometimes you got to shove a sleeping bag in a boat, in a kayak, but I also would suggest it's a compression. I think I just said it. Sorry. I suggest it is a dry bag that is also compression. Just, it makes everyone's life easier when your sleeping bag is guaranteed to be dry. Moving on to more things about stuff sacks and dry bags, actually. So it is perfectly fine to bring stuff sacks on this trip. I would say in general, we really emphasize that dry bags are probably a better tool than a stuff sack, especially for things that you want to keep dry, which, let's be honest, is most of what you would be putting in a stuff sack anyway. The dry bags have to fit nicely into your boats, so you need a few smaller dry bags. You don't want them any bigger than 20 liters. 20 liters is the max that can really fit in there nicely to pack with other things in your kayak. And we also recommend that your dry bags are not rubberized texture on the outside, because those are just really hard to pack into any sort of shape. They're sturdy, but they're hard to pack in a kayak. So. All right, moving on to some optional gear. So camp supplies, I think I mentioned this earlier, we supply the life jacket, the paddling jacket, the paddle, the wetsuits. If you would like to bring your own, that's totally fine. Feel free. Once you get here, your leaders will check the gear to make sure it meets the specifications that we need for it to be weighted safely for the trip. Like, for example, if you're bringing your own life jacket, it has to be a type 3 life jacket. Your wetsuit would have to be a certain amount of millimeters thick to keep you warm enough. But yeah, just bring it with you. And if it ends up that it doesn't work, we'll keep it in storage here while you're on the trip. And then you can just borrow one of ours, and that's totally fine. Other great optional items are a sit pad of some sort. When you don't have one of those nicer campsites with a picnic table, sit pads can be really nice, or you could just to get a good sunset view. Yeah. Sit pads could be great, or also a similar thing to a sit pad would be a Crazy Creek. Other things are, I don't know if any of you noticed on the wildlife slideshow, but there was a picture of a guy that had a pretty phenomenal fish. The fishing on Lake Nipigon is pretty good. A lot of the local First Nation population fish as that's their livelihood. So if you're into fishing, bring your fishing gear. Your trip leaders will help you get the licenses you need en route to the trip, and you can have a delicious evening if you're successful. So yeah, highly suggest fishing gear. Yes, moving on to some more comfort items. So Comfort items are things that relax you or gives you a way to process the trip, and it can really impact your experience in a positively way. So we highly suggest journaling. I journaled on several of my Manatress trips. I never have been capable of journaling outside of a trail experience, but I look back on those journals so fondly. I read them occasionally, and it just is such a great snapshot of like the growth and the experiences I went through during that time. Similarly, photography can do the same thing. So consider bringing something like that. A lot of people also like bringing a book, or Kindle is also allowed as long as it doesn't connect to the internet. Those can be really great. Sometimes people will bring a book that they'll share amongst the whole group. So they'll either take turns reading out loud, or they'll just pass it around kind of. People have been known to bring instruments. Honestly, the world is your oyster a little bit on what other things you want to bring on the trip. If you have any questions about if something is suitable, please feel free to email Luke or I. Otherwise, just like with your life jacket that you might want to bring, you can bring it and the trip leader can just be like, tell you, no, that's not going to work, and then keep it in storage to come back. So, all right, I think that's everything I have to say about gear for the moment. I'm sure we'll have questions about it at the end, but moving on from gear, let's talk about a little bit of the preparation. One moment. Okay, a little bit of preparation that you can do before camp. Let's talk about some physical preparation. So when it comes to physically preparing for these trips, we want you to be active, but we don't want you to push yourself too hard. It would be horrible to injure yourself because you were trying really hard to prepare yourself to be like the strongest person ever for this trip. And that's not really, you don't need to be the strongest person ever for this trip. So do low impact activities like biking, yoga, going for walks or light hikes. If you have access to a lake and a kayak and you want to practice paddling, that's also a phenomenal idea, but don't go out of your way to do anything crazy. Just keep it chill. And then kayaking doesn't have as much gear that needs to be broken in as like canoeing or backpacking with hiking boots. But I do suggest that you organize or just kind of play around with how you would use the gear before the trip and think about how you're going to prepare it and where it's going to be used. And this can help you make sure that you have everything that you need. Moving on to some more mental preparation. So this is a new trip. It's a new experience. There's new people. It's not only a physical challenge, it's definitely an interpersonal challenge as well to some extent. So I want you participants, talking to you, to think about what should you bring with yourself figuratively to build that community with your trip mates. What attitude should you come in with? What communication skills do you have that you can use to form those relationships and build an experience that everyone will enjoy? Yeah, just things to ponder as you're getting ready to go on this experience. All right. This final section is about upcoming communications. So if you're in session 1, then you're going to be arriving on June 21st and you're going to be leaving on July 11th. If you're in session 2, you're going to be arriving on July 21st and leaving on August 10th. In case anyone is questioning it, because I did, yes, that is the same amount of days, even though it seems like the second one is the day shorter. It's just because July is a longer month than June is. Parents, I would love for you to keep a lookout for any emails from Camp Docs with anything that you might be missing or that we might need more additional information from you on. And then for these longer trips, we really do advise that people get trip insurance. There's a lot of information about trip insurance on the Camp Docs, so please take a look at that if that's something you're interested in. If you have further questions about it, Luke and I are not experts, so we highly suggest that you reach out to Karen Christofferson here at Manitwish, and she knows everything that we need to know. Yeah, so with that, I'm going to open it up for some questions. So feel free to either write in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask a question if you would like. I know that was a lot of information I just threw at you, so feel free to take a second to process.
Just a couple notes while people are rolling potential questions around in their mind, I just want to reemphasize something that Kelly shared. Please test your gear before you get here. Some things that I've seen really commonly are people will show up for a trip and they'll be like, hey, here's my brand new sleeping pad. And then their first night out, they have to figure out how to inflate it. Or they bring a sleeping bag, but they haven't packed it into the stuff sack that they intend to use on trail. So I highly recommend testing those systems first, and also trying on your different layers. Kelly talked about making sure that your rain jacket is large enough to fit over other layers. I would recommend physically putting that stuff on, move around in it, see how it feels. Those small things really pay dividends when you're doing them for multiple days in a row, and you know it's going to be a good and comfortable system.
Yes, absolutely. We have a couple questions in the chat. The first one is how many people are on each trip? Each trip has about 5 participants and 2 trip leaders. And then the next question is, I don't have a puffy jacket. Should I get one? Oop. I would say I would err to the side of yes. I'm always one for having more warm layers just in case. You can always take off layers, but you can't always put on more of them. And a puffy jacket is a very all-purpose layer. I do know that they can be kind of expensive sometimes. So if that's part of your concern, you might be able to supplement by just having maybe a couple more layers of fleeces, like some thin as well as some thicker fleeces. So there's ways to get around it. It's not absolutely imperative. But it's a really nice layer that can pack down really small to have.
I'm personally a big fan of fleece layers for their durability. So I think that's also a good thing to just keep in mind, especially if it is a colder day and you're paddling around in it and you don't want something to get snagged on like a sharp corner or a stick or something like that. So yeah, I think Kelly brings up a really good point about just finding room to add a couple more layers. Also, bringing a warm hat is something that can really pay dividends at night. I find that's something that helps me sleep a lot more comfortably, is just being able to throw a beanie on and know that I've got a little more insulation there.
The next question is, what is the typical route, a loop down and back? I have not looked at full maps of these routes. I've been kind of bouncing around and stuff. I know that I'm trying to pull some memories out of my brain right now. I know that a lot of trips end up going between 100 and 120 miles on the whole time. I think a lot of times I would say a full circuit is not usually in the works for this trip. I think a lot of times it's you go along one edge, and then either you get picked up at another location, or you kind of come back through like a different part of the chain of islands. The question is, are the trippers able to find out who else is going on the trip with them? Unfortunately, you are not able to find out who is on your trip until you arrive at camp. There's a lot of logistical moving parts that go into deciding who goes on what trip and where each trip is going and who's leading what trip. And sometimes we have to make last minute changes. So we don't release that information until everything is really finalized, which is right about when everyone shows up. So yeah, we're not going to be able to share that information with you. The question is there a possibility to request others to be on your trip? That is something that happens quite a bit in camp. In Outpost, we don't usually have that set up. Oftentimes we don't have the possibility of requesting people because sometimes there's only one trip. That obviously is not the case in this situation, but just in general, Outpost tends not to because there's a lot of other logistical reasons why we put people on different trips. Yeah. The next question is, where will Outpost kids be staying for before and after? So when Outpost kids arrive in camp, they'll be staying in the Smith Leadership Village, which is on the eastern side of camp. Based around the Manager's Leadership Center is kind of our home base. So they'll be sleeping in a different area of camp than the rest of the kids. The cabins have their own bathrooms in them, and they actually have kitchens, though there's no reason really to use them because everyone still eats at Nash. But yeah. Will there be a paddle-in is the next question. Unfortunately, the intermediate trips do not have a paddle-in. The timing just doesn't quite usually work out with the way the pacing of the summer. So they do not have a paddle-in. Oftentimes the trip leaders will put together slideshows, and then all the intermediate trips that came back at the same time will have their own little, just the kids and the trip leaders celebration in the basement of the MLC where they share stories and pictures of their trips and then can bring that home to show you all.
And we will make sure to send out copies of that slideshow as well.
Mm-hmm. The next question is, how long will it take for them to get from camp to Lake Nipigon? We spread the drive out over 2 days, and I believe it is on the way there, it's a 7-hour drive. They sleep, and then it's another 2 hours Lake Nipigon. So about 9 hours total of a drive. And then it's the same amount on the way back for the most part. We just separate it out a little bit differently because we have them sleep at a different location.
One thing that I just want to add on for that drive time is that with that international border crossing in the middle and getting a van full of people from one country to the other across an international border, sometimes that process goes very quickly. Sometimes there's a lot of people going through a border crossing, and that takes a little bit longer. That's part of the reason that we like to drive up over 2 days. Avoid any situations where a group is trying to do 9-hour driving in one day, but then they lose 2, 3, 4 hours at the border, not common, but we just want to proactively get ahead of that and make sure that they don't then end up getting in much later than we wanted them to. So that's why we split that drive up over 2 days.
Okay, the next question is what will we do for sleeping arrangements for the first night if the drive is split into 2 days? Oh, so they stay at a campsite overnight. They stay at a campsite that we've reserved for them along the North Shore of Lake Superior. Yeah. It's a little car camping moment in the middle of their wilderness experience.
Good chance to test all that gear out before you are at the middle of the wilderness with it.
Yeah. That's often the time when people remember that they forgot their rain jacket or something, and then we luckily are able to scramble and find something. But let's try not to do that. The question is, are there any personal hygiene products that aren't allowed? Off the Okay, so my answer to this question kind of, I feel like personal hygiene products can be a very broad array. We do tend to, if it's something that's really large and bulky, I would suggest not bringing it. If it's something that's really smelly, I would also suggest trying to find an alternative product. If you have something more specific that you want to ask, feel free to contact us about like a more specific item that you're concerned about. But for the most part, I feel like you're usually okay bringing a lot of things. There isn't going to be space. We're not going to have you like shampoo your hair in the water because that's going to be disturbing this pristine environment. So I'd say the restrictions on that are more for impacting the world around you than it is anything else. Yeah. Luke, do you have anything to add to that?
So I think being aware of things that impact the world around you, so not bringing body wash or shampoo is a really good like summary as you're considering potential personal hygiene products. The other thing that I'm also very aware of when I'm like packing up to go out on trail for a trip like this is like not bringing like deodorant because when you aren't able to like shower regularly, those are things that can build up on your skin. So I would not bring deodorant. I probably wouldn't bring like dry shampoo, anything like that. If you aren't getting a shower regularly, you're not washing off the residue of that, and that can lead to clogged pores, chafing, just some general discomfort. But things like toothbrush, toothpaste, floss, sunscreen, stuff like that, highly recommend.
Yeah, I do know also
I,
some people, especially if you break out easily, some people bring like little round face wipes just to clean their face every day. That's perfectly fine. Just with disposable items like that, remember that anything you bring in, you will have to bring out with you. So yeah.
does that provide, hopefully that provides a little bit more context on gauging which personal hygiene items will be a good fit for trail versus what might want to stay back at camp.
Mhm. The question is, will the two trips see each other on trail? We don't know the answer to that quite yet because the trip leaders are still formulating their routes. I would say oftentimes the trip leaders tend to go in different directions. If they do see each other on trail, it'd probably only be once somewhere around the middle or something like that. But I think there's a lot of possibilities for different routes on Lake Nipigon, and so oftentimes they do not see each other.
It can also be good to know just heading into the trip if anyone has friends who don't necessarily end up on the same trip. It is possible that you all might see each other maybe at a distance or something like that. But we're also not going to have like multiple groups like clumping up together because when we get more people in a concentrated area, we tend to leave more impact on the wilderness. So while it is possible that groups might see each other while they're on trail, the most that's going to look like is maybe a paddle wave in the distance, but that's about it.
The question is, will the two trips stay together before and after trail? So the housing that we have in the Smith Village are cabins that have the two-sided cabins kind of. There's a common room and then there's a sleeping area on one side and a sleeping area on the other side. Each trip gets their own sleeping area. I am not certain at this point if I don't know that the kayaking Nipigons will be in the same cabin together. At the same time that the kayaking Nipigons are going to be in camp, so are the Isle Royale backpacking trips and the Pioneer canoeing trips. So between those cabins, there'll probably be another trip on the other side of the cabin, but it's unknown which one it will be yet. Okay. Next question is, will there ever be a day where they like stay at the campsite for the whole day? I think my daughter calls them duff days or something. Yes, I think Luke touched on this a teeny bit. We do tend to build in about 2 duff days into these Nipigon trips, these 14-day trips. I tend to have about 2 of them. It kind of depends on the route that your trip leaders take. I read a trip log recently of a group that had 4 duff days, which is probably too much. They said that they wish they had a little bit longer route, and so we've adjusted for that. But yeah, so 2 to 3 duff days is common. Sometimes people will take them because it's just a little too windy for it to be safe to travel, so they'll just have a fun day in camp instead. And sometimes they take them just because they want a break. And I was looking through old pictures when I was making this video, and people do some really fun stuff on duff days. It's not just a day to do nothing necessarily, although it can be. But some people were making cool, like using found rocks and twigs and leaves and stuff to make these really cool artistic designs on the beach, and or going on day hikes to go check out another place. So yeah, duff days are definitely part of the experience.
All right, we'll probably give about another minute or so in case anyone has any other questions. And I also want to encourage all of you. I know that we've thrown a lot of information at everybody tonight. If you think of a question later tonight, tomorrow, next week, and you want to talk about it, or you want to talk about anything else related to the trip, please feel free to reach out to Kelly or myself. It can be anything from trail food to weather to raincoats to sleeping bags, any other pieces of gear. We love talking about this sort of stuff. So if you think of something later, please know that you are more than welcome to reach out. We would love to hear from you and help set you up for a successful trip. All right. I think that seems to be all the questions that we have at the moment. If anyone thinks of anything else, please feel free to reach out. I really appreciate you all taking the time to join us for this tonight. We love getting to connect with campers and families before the trip to help set you all up for success. All right. Have a good night, everybody.